Hello, I'm Lynn Robinson, Director General of the IIC. I welcome you to my conversation with the IIC Small Nations Regulators Forum incoming Chair, Dr. Allyson Leacock, Chairman of the Barbados Broadcasting Authority and Director of National Transformation Initiative, Government of Barbados. Dr. Leacock is also an independent media and human development consultant. She led a coalition of 112 media houses in 24 Caribbean countries for 12 years and trained over 2,000 Caribbean broadcasters. She served on the executive board for the Global Media AIDS Initiative and was elected for 2 terms as chairman of the Global Steering Committee for the World AIDS Campaign. Dr. Leacock was also Cultural Affairs Specialist at the US Embassy, covering the Caribbean, and Officer in Charge and Student Coordinator at the University of the West of Indies Distance Education Centre, now the Open Campus. Dr. Leacock has a wide-ranging professional background, including executive management in corporate communications, media, needs assessment, training, human resource development and leadership, as well as broadcast media including production and presentation as TV news anchor and as General Manager for the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. Dr. Leacock holds Master's and PhD degrees in Educational Technology from the Concordia University in Canada and a BA in English and Education from Stirling University in the UK. A former national athlete, gymnast, dancer and actress, Dr. Leacock is trained in sign language, is a volunteer with the Special Olympics and Barbados Council for the Disabled. Welcome, Dr. Allyson Leacock. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. Reading through your profile, and obviously as I've just done there, I'm extremely impressed with your breadth of experience and also the knowledge across such a wide-ranging professional background. I mean, you know, it is extensive and absolutely inspiring from there. But I want to ask, the sort of first question I want to ask you is, how did you first come involved in the media industry?
I know you're not going to believe this, but it was pure accident. I was a student in 6th form. My English teacher was leaving for the summer and he asked me if I'd like to host a teen radio program in the summer. I said, no, I'm not interested. And he said, you're going to get paid. And I suddenly became very interested. So I agreed. And, you know, I was 18 at the time, probably 17 and a bit. And you feel fireproof. And at the time, Elton John was a big fan of mine. Celebrities visited Barbados all the time. And in those days, we didn't hide that they were in Barbados and they would say where they were staying. And I decided I was going to go and see if I could get an interview with Elton John, now Sir Elton John. So I drove up to the house, I rang the doorbell, out popped Bernie Taupin. And I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, hang on a minute. And he came back, opened the door, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting interviewing Elton John. And I was just beaming about his music and all that I loved. And he chatted with me, and I took it back to the station. As far as I was concerned, I got to meet my, you know, I'm a fan of his, so that was it. And of course, my elders and bosses saw it, heard it, I should say, and offered me a job. I was not at all interested in the media. I wanted to do English, dance, and drama. And this was going to pay me a little bit more than if I proceeded to teach or something, to save money to pay for my first year at university at least. And so I took it. And that's really how I got into broadcasting. It was not on my radar at all.
Wow. That's just quite an amazing entry at 18 as well. I mean, do you think that's because of your youth? There was no fear. It was just a case of, you know, a task to do.
I absolutely think it was. And, you know, when you're younger, you feel you're fireproof. I told myself the most you could do is say no.
Exactly,
you know. And again, I think because, as you know, this is a profession that is anchored in authenticity. And because I was just genuinely doing what I I wanted to. The conversation with him ended up being obviously up to scratch,
Yeah.
and then of course, as I learned the rudiments of broadcasting, I enjoyed it. But then I left and studied and so on. And I still didn't think about doing broadcasting in a serious way until I came back and was pursued then to anchor evening news and to really function more as an assistant program manager when I returned from my studies. Luckily for me, where I studied in Scotland had a radio station. I was at Stirling University, so there's a castle, and they had Radio Air 3. So I continued some broadcasting while I was at university, which helped, I suppose, to keep me interested. It was fun for me. I didn't take myself too seriously or the profession, although I had some really tough masters and trainers who were unforgiving and unrelenting in standards, which has never left me, really, in everything,
Yeah, no, and that sort of brings me on to, okay, they were sort of tough on you, but are there any sort of role models or mentors in your career development who you've learned from the most? Is there any, that stand out for you?
Oh, yes, for sure. Externally, I mean, there are role models here. There were role models, Marvel Manning, Jeanette Lane Clark, in terms of women. Lots of men, of course. One became my mentor, really, Rafi Khan, who was inducted into the Caribbean Broadcasting Union Hall of Fame. But also in my personal development as a child at school, my physical education teacher, Molly Crowcroft, who's now passed on, she certainly instilled an intrinsic value in excellence, time management, team playing. It's not about you in the dance company or in the track and field team, both of which I participated in extensively, as well as gymnastics. So there was that discipline and time management, which I learned from her, but also a value in your sense of self. Carolyn Barrow, who was the wife of our first Prime Minister since we became independent, she was a master interviewer, effortless, articulate. She drew you in. And that was one of the skills I learned. She was having a conversation and she got lots of information from her guests. It was effortless, it was unpretentious, and I really admired her skill. But the profession also teaches you grit, and there was a lot of that to learn. You really couldn't have a thin skin because we sort of had two phones, a red phone and a green phone. And when the red phone rang, you knew that your job was on the line, sort of thing. But I mean, mistakes were not tolerated. Now I think we're far more relaxed about that, but they were certainly unrelenting about standards. And when you were doing continuity, a lot of which I did to get my feet wet. And I think internationally, Christiane Amanpour, I think she's top drawer because she's always so prepared and has this style of engagement as well in interviews. And if we consider the transition and the development of the profession, there are some styles that have evolved over time. And for those of us who came up I certainly came up with a strong British background because I learned in the rediffusion mode, which was very much oriented to the BBC. So.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you're saying about those sort of mentors, but there often are those that you observe going through your career and think, that's how not to do it. And I think sometimes that's quite useful as well. So you get that contrast on there. So that there's definitely those that you think that is the right way because of their values and standards. and then those that are the opposite, and you think, oh wow, you know. So it is
Absolutely.
yeah, quite interesting
Absolutely.
on there. So sort of how much and in what ways have you seen, I mean, we just touched upon there about sort of values and standards and how things are different, but what have you seen in the workplace environment for women change in the course of your career?
Well, I think we are fundamentally a matriarchal society. So I've always seen women in strong roles. I've seen some women obviously pushed to the side because of the orientation that we're still deferring to the male dominance in certain positions. I was, in fact, the first broadcaster to be on continuity and be a DJ at Rediffusion. So I was in the midst of quite a few men, even though I had some senior professional women that I could model myself on. And that is an experience that very quickly you recognize who you are, because you have to define who you are in that environment. I think realistically, there have been strides on one level, but I'd say make no mistake about it. While there's an appreciation for our role in organizations, the male patronizing attitude is more veiled. So there is a subtle resentment in responses. And I think perhaps the more distressing reality is that our women are held to a very different standard. It is disingenuous. And unfortunately, more often than not, you do not get the kind of support for holding a position. I think there are some very subtle approaches that are used with women in business. I became a manager at 25 in an environment where economists were king and they were all male. And so I quickly learned that there are stereotypes that persist. And there is an assumption that if you get to the top, you slept to get there, one. Secondly, that if you are successful, you need to be tougher, and you need to model your conduct on the male way of leading. And I never fell into that trap. I always felt that I was going to be as girly and feminine as I wanted to be, and if I wanted to wear my jewelry and my makeup and my heels, I was going to do that. And I think it's really important for women in any career to be comfortable in their skin and to understand that it doesn't really matter if people think you are weak. If you know you are not, it's okay.
I mean, you know, it is an area that we could explore even further. And I was going to say, do you think the next generation will see a difference, and will there be different attitudes in the sort of younger males that are coming through, or are they modelling themselves on their predecessors or not? But you know,
actually, that's actually, I actually think that the young people get it, and they don't take it as much as we were socialized to accept it. They don't. They're quite prepared to break the status quo. Many of them, and I do think we have a generation of young men who are very comfortable with confident, strong, intelligent women. They have no difficulty in working alongside them or having women lead them. I mean, there is a counterpoint of men who have sort of given up and said, well, the women are going to take over, so if she wants to lead, let her do it, and I'll ride on her coattails. So we do that. But I think that the next generation does get it, and a lot of the young women are far more self-assured to say, no, I'm not accepting that. And they're not timid about asserting their rightful place in any setting.
So, you know, it's a work in progress, I think, is a phrase, and it is a generational change, isn't it?
It is.
As we
And
go.
I also believe that as women, this is a painful reality to face, but we have to take some responsibility for how we bring up our boys.
Yes.
Because really, we create that distinction. You have parents who will say, "Oh, he's a boy. He has to sow his wild oats," as we say here. And then we will be very strident and difficult with any young man that wants to date our daughters. And I'm like, well, you know, you're sending mixed signals here because you're encouraging your son to cheat on his wife or girlfriend, but you want this sensitive, caring young man to do that. And we're evolving in terms of our, not just the fact that we do not allow our emotions to show. It's not a natural thing. So mental health, it has its stigma. It does globally, I know. But I think because we are not into that, we feel that, you know, I got lashes when I was growing up and I turned out fine, you know? So the sensitivity that we want to see in men, we try to beat it out of them and say, but, you know, stop crying, you're not being a man. And really what we're doing is killing the sensitivity that we want in a partner and in the father for our children. So I think we have to also recalibrate our socialization, which has taught us to accept certain mores as though they need to remain that way. We can change it, and we can change it because our sons have demonstrated an appreciation for the value of women without it being seen as one or the other.
So it's those role models for these young men coming through as well. They need to see, and there needs to be those role models from the women.
Right.
But
and largely they have to take it from the women because we still have too high a percentage of absentee fathers. So I think that is a reality.
So it's a huge area to discuss, but you know, definitely one that the conversations around the world will continue for, I think, many a year to come on. And I mean, we were just talking about role models and sort of developing and training. Now, you spend a lot of time helping and training young women. What needs to be done to help more women reach those leadership positions in our industry? So we've touched on, you know, there needs to be more, but what are your thoughts on how that could be achieved, even, you know, in the next sort of 10 years or so on from that?
I think, first of all, there needs to be an acceptance that the lines, the authoritarian, the autocratic approach to workplaces is obsolete. And you actually get the better performances from an environment that allows people to challenge you as the leader, but also to challenge the status quo. For young women in this profession today, I would urge them to do a couple of things. And the first is a mantra that I think applies to any profession, but I'll say it in this context in particular because of the celebrity stardom magnet that the profession attracts, for more people wanting to just be the star as opposed to telling the story and letting the story be the star. But prepare. There's nothing to replace that. The misogyny is real, but you do not need to let it define you. Women are held to a completely different standard. You have to work twice as hard. You have to excel more than the average male. But ultimately, performance is the best revenge, and consistent performance. There needs to be an intrinsic desire to be better than you were the last time, not when somebody is watching, just because you have set your standards at a level that really you are modeling excellence and it has become a habit. So you've never arrived.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, in my view, the
Yeah.
most important thing. You've never arrived. There's
Yeah.
always
Great.
another
Totally not.
level to
Yeah.
which you can aspire. And I find that if you remain focused
Mm.
and allow the noise, not be unmindful of it, but
Mm.
not let it define you, restrict you, inhibit you,
Yeah.
but use it as a learning tool to
Mm.
empower you to simply deliver.
Mm.
I find that inevitably works well because
Mm.
you don't lose your energy getting involved in ego fights. You
Mm.
simply park that individual or that circumstance and recognize that
Yeah.
that is really their issue and not yours, and continue to perform. And you ultimately will float to the top if your performance
Yeah.
has been consistent. It can't be only when you feel like it.
Mm. Yeah, no, I understand. It's that personal drive, isn't it, that keeps you ongoing, going
That's
forward.
right.
Yeah.
And I think in our day-to-day relations with colleagues, just being compassionate and
Yeah.
decent, and these things matter
Yeah.
because your reputation is all you have,
Mm.
and your reputation is aligned not to what so much you say, but how you deal with
Mm.
yourself
Yeah.
and others and what you do. So I'd say that for any young woman wanting to get into
Mm.
the business or any profession for that matter.
Yeah. It's a personal brand, isn't it, that they need to sort of
To
have, and
develop.
this and standards, and like you said, it's all about those standards and value, and then the drive that comes with
Yeah,
that. On that. Now,
exactly.
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
talking of sort of brings me on to the next question, and the name that I'm going to say that Madeleine Albright. So she famously said, and I'm going to read this here: that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support women. The YouTube one I watched of that is her trademark phrase, they say, and this was at a keynote speech for Hillary Clinton back in 2006.
Mm.
Now, as I say, that quote is, "There's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women." Is that a sentiment that you agree with or not?
I'd have to say yes and no.
Yeah.
I'd have to say yes and no. I do believe that there needs to be a mindfulness about us in our engagement with women. I have watched with interest. I've worked with our current Prime Minister for 8 years before, when I was Director of Culture and when I headed the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. And so I see her now as Prime Minister, and those who have not worked with her
Mm.
make assumptions about her. And one of the things I have admired about her is her consistency in passion and
Mm.
humility, and not just driving herself, but living in the present and assessing the environment around
Mm.
her. I feel as though some of the socialization to which I referred earlier is evident in the inclination
Mm.
to hold her to a different standard than any other prime minister in this country, even though she, like the New Zealand prime minister,
Yeah.
is governing at in an inordinately difficult time.
Yeah.
But the reality is, um, sometimes we are our worst enemy
Mm.
as women, and we play into the narrative of the catty
Yeah.
dimension of women working together and that sort of thing. But I always hesitate a little bit about defining support in any context purely on gender,
Mm.
because I believe a good leader is a good leader,
Yeah, great.
um, whether male or female.
Yeah.
And so it is difficult for me to follow blindly in any
Mm. Mm.
context. So my intuition sort of gives me that caveat, like,
Yeah.
yes, but
Yeah.
I can't say that across the board. I do think we can be more prudent in how we
Mm.
challenge if we read a situation to see
Yeah.
that gender is very much the factor
Yeah.
behind this scenario. and we should be smart enough to detect that and not play into it,
Yeah.
and ensure that we support our women. And if we have a difficulty, deal with it privately where you can see that there is a desire to pit us against each other that the old boys club continues to use.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand. I mean, it's an extremely bold statement, and you do have to have the confidence to say that, you know, a statement as bold as that goes globally, but to have it as your trademark statement as well. So it will be to see in years to come how it's seen and discussed and so on in maybe 20, 30 years time. So
indeed. But I am one of her fans, so that's
okay. And I am, but I don't know. I actually felt quite uncomfortable reading it out because I don't know whether I do or not, you know. So anyway.
Exactly. Yes.
Now back to your biography, and it is a testament to the wide range of interests, as I say, from broadcast production to acting to human development and leading charitable organisations to government initiatives. In what ways has your experience helped you in your role at Barbados Broadcasting Authority?
I think the experience has certainly enriched me as an individual, and it's taught me a lot of lessons, because instead of being siloed in one direction, it allows me to see the bigger picture. I think I've learned about the value of empathy, humility, appreciation for the value of the backstory and everybody's story, because we really don't ever know fully people's stories. I think the need for regulators to be more compassionate, well, for anybody in a working environment, especially today, but more in the context of convergence. The regulator has to, and I was delighted to see that the IIC has a webinar coming up on March 11th, because it aligns very much with my feeling that the regulator has to move from rules to principles, in order to use, if we want to call it, moral suasion. But I think my experience has given me an appreciation for the role of the broadcaster, as well as the media executive who is running a network of radio stations and television and cable networks, all of the issues that apply to each of those strands of a network. They come to me now as chair of the Broadcasting Authority. So I do have an appreciation for the dilemma. And so rather than being strident in one direction, it allows me to step back, weigh it up, and hopefully give a balanced, informed approach to how I engage. And certainly one of the first things I did as chairman of the Broadcasting Authority was to call in and meet with the media and say, look, in my view, we have to be partners on a number of things. If we look objectively at digital networks and the internet, the temptation to regulate it is there for all kinds of reasons. But the reality is, this is an evolution that is taking place, and they need not be as petrified as they are. I know many of our mainstream broadcasters are, but more look at what are the opportunities that this throws up for me to regroup, recalibrate, and reset how I deliver information.
Yeah, okay. And that sort of, you know, and it leads me on actually, but we're delighted to have you as the new chair of the IIC Small Nations Regulators Forum. And you and I have spoken a lot about this over the last few weeks. So, but, you know, we're looking at topics through the year, but what do you see as the main challenges facing smaller nations in the world of communications regulation?
I think the challenges facing small nations are monumental, really. I think there is an intrinsic tendency for large nations to see us, we're invisible, we're voiceless, And to some extent, we feel powerless to a large extent. We see it very tangibly right now in the Wild West, as our Prime Minister calls it, for the vaccines.
Yeah.
And the reality that we don't have any cushion, an island 166 square miles wide. So you can't move from this state to another if there's, you know, an unbearable high incidence of COVID. And similarly, climate change. We are the recipients of the worst side effects of bad decisions on climate change, but we'll be decimated first, not the countries that have contributed to the implications of its capacity to decimate us. So I believe that there has to be a paradigm shift for a larger focus on moral leadership, that the world is not only about the survival of the biggest and the strongest. And unfortunately, you know, the big bad wolf and the elephant in the room is in a transition at this point, and we hope that some moral leadership is returned to the core of how the world communicates and deals with itself. But there are unique vulnerabilities for small island states, and a lot of what happens in the first world and in the larger nations, if you sneeze, we catch a cold. And that's not something that we say tritely, it's just the reality. And you just have to look at tourism dependent islands like ours and see the absolute devastation. About 93% reduction in tourist arrivals. Is like, how do we survive? And people do have to live. And our governments, even within that context, even the framework for loans, you know, the kinds of blacklistings and so on that take place, is unmindful of the human dimension of governance. And we can't really continue as small island states as part of a global conversation and be unmindful of the uniqueness that obtains for small nations. And that is why IIC, in my view, stands as a beacon for many institutions who are working on addressing some of the globe's biggest challenges with technology and media, because IIC has tangibly demonstrated that they value small nations. And I think that is really a model that many more entities could emulate.
No, thank you. And I do believe, you know, I'm hoping that we are being part of that sort of voice with our Small Nations Regulators Forum. So
exactly,
it's definitely something that for me personally as well, I like small, whether it's small businesses as well as small nations. So, you know, this next few years is an exciting time for us and going forward. With and not only with our larger organisations and larger regulators, because it, like you said, it's about that conversation and about that transparency and everyone working together.
Correct.
So I'm going to bring you on to my final question. So it's an and finally, and this is going back to our sort of earlier conversation. What advice would you give to young women wanting to succeed in the communications industry today?
I would say for sure, set your sights on quality. And I say that unapologetically. I believe that in addition to the importance of focusing on your own skills and your drive to get ahead, that ultimately you need to be multifaceted, you need to be nimble, you need to have all of the soft skills that people told you. Yes, but you need to learn the rudiments of the profession. Yes, you do. But we know many people who are highly qualified that nobody wants to work with.
Yeah, exactly.
We know many people who have a number of certifications and a lot of degrees and PhDs, and for some reason they're unable to demonstrate the kind of initiative, the kind of critical thinking, problem solving, and just being adaptable. The one thing I think COVID-19 has shown the world is that uncertainty is here for quite some time. And how we navigate that uncertainty, how we cope with it, and how we reinvent ourselves to remain relevant will be part of the success of those perhaps that we thought were not that important. And they have demonstrated an agility in coping with the challenges. And that is really what a top shelf broadcaster, communicator in this business needs to be. So if you started out only as an announcer, you now need to be a videographer, an editor. You know, you just have to do it all. And when you can be multifaceted, you are really a treasure for any employer, or even if you are independent, because you can do it all. And if you elevate to a position of authority, you are sensitive to all of the roles and all of the categories of staff you may have to supervise. So I see being multifaceted as a tremendous asset. I've always felt that it was important to learn new things. I'm still learning new things. I've led 5 organizations, and I'm learning now how to lead an organization virtually, and never done it before. So there is always something to learn. And I think if young people in general, but young women in this business, keep that top of mind, they'll continue to grow and excel, because once you recognize that there's something else for you to learn, you will always be at the top of your game.
No, I agree. Like you said, it's about that adaptability, almost the emotional intelligence as well, having that as well as being a subject matter expert, but you know, really being aware of your surroundings and people that you're working with.
Exactly.
And also accepting or acknowledging change, because you know, with or without a pandemic, change happens, continual.
Exactly.
So, and like you said, that's where the learning comes from.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, Allyson, for taking the time to speak to me today. I have absolutely thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I'm sorry that we can't do it in person, but I do look forward to when we can meet, have that first coffee or lunch, you know. And I am extremely excited to work with you over the next year, as I say, as chair of the IIC Small Nations Regulators Forum. So thank you for today. Extremely interesting insight into your, I mean, I just can't get over about the Elton John.
I know.
Just an absolute, you know, amazing, really is from there. And as I say, thank you for taking the time. We will be working with you through the year, so everyone will see you with the IIC going forward. Thank you, Allyson.
And thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it as well. And I'm looking forward to my time at the helm of the Small Nations Regulators Forum. And I will leave you with this one. The irony of the Elton John interview came into sharp focus when I headed the Caribbean Broadcast Media Partnership on HIV and AIDS, because one of the founding funders was the Elton John Foundation. So we met again.
Oh, that is brilliant. I nearly asked earlier, but there you go. I got my answer. So just absolutely excellent. Thank you, Allyson.
Yes, thank you too. All the very best, and stay safe.
Thank you, and you.